Hello. As a part of this podcast, I want to talk about different tropes I enjoy from time to time, just so we're on the same page when I talk about tropes, because there are different meanings to this word. A trope is a familiar pattern or element that often appears in a specific genre or type of work, usually giving the same ideas or themes to the audience. So yeah, this is a segment that I want to do from time to time. Like, why have some of these tropes stuck around for so long? Why do I personally enjoy them so much? Like a breakdown of some of the more popular ones. So today I will start with a trope that has maintained its firm place both in literature, movies, and pop culture. It's the mad scientist trope. It's funny because if you wanted me to come up with a trope for this day and age, it would be the mad billionaire. But obviously, every century has its own demons. So, what's the mad scientist? In science fiction, sometimes the typical villain isn't like an unstoppable machine or the aliens or like a natural catastrophe. It's mostly a single, very intelligent individual who is just willing to push boundaries and get his hands dirty. A mad scientist is a classic character trope that is depicted as messy, eccentric, and mentally unstable with questionable morals and usually low emotional intelligence. They regularly perform like unconventional experiments that can produce disastrous outcomes. Like, naturally, not all of them have the same discerning traits, but the most common ones that a lot of them have are striving for perfection. They usually display very quirky behaviors. They are overly focused on their projects. They struggle with small talk and social conventions. They have very little interest in human interaction usually. This can differ on the story, but they are either disregarding or defying authority figures, like, for example, claiming authority, taking over the world, etc. Or they're like the sidekick or a tool for a bigger authority figure. Like, it's one of these, I think, most of the time. They usually neglect basic tasks, like they stereotypically neglect their personal hygiene. One other thing is that they usually have methods that conflict with mainstream standards or morals and typically believe their work to be superior to these morals and transcend the beliefs of the time. Very stereotypically, mad scientists tend to talk in thick German or Eastern European accents. Like, I'm sure this whole description rings a bell. We have seen these characters dominate science fiction on screen and on paper. The mad scientist trope is so prevalent that most people can easily think of several examples. The mad scientist comes in different forms. One that has been quite popular in recent years is the reluctant mad scientist. The reluctant mad scientists are morally good and decent, but like have a bad employer or they're generally controlled by an evil authority. The reluctant mad scientist is typically depicted as like the sole character who fully understands the implications of their work, making them like the only one who is genuinely concerned of using it like responsibly. Other types of mad scientists that we see commonly, there's this definition, this term, the evolutionary biologist, like the mad scientists that experiment with human race, or the omnidisciplinary scientists, like the scientists who are knowledgeable in every form of science that the plot requires, like the Renaissance scientists. Then there are the ones like who can invent or do whatever like the plot needs them to do. And then there's this other type, the professor guinea pig, the ones that use themselves as test subjects. I'm sure Spider-Man had loads of them. So the mad scientist trope historically can be traced back several hundred years. It is especially like worth noting that the romantic Gothic wave, with an obsession with German Gothic tales at the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th, used the alchemist figure heavily as both character and a metaphor. So this was one particular example that we can trace back to that was very prevalent at the time. But then there were like many earlier versions as well. But the concept of the mad scientist as we recognize it today originated with Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein and was influenced by the growing fascination with scientific advancements. In this novel, a young scientist named Victor Frankenstein, and I'm underlining this is the scientist's name. So this scientist is obsessed with discovering the secrets of life and death and is greatly motivated by his own ego. So Victor assembles a humanoid creature from various body parts and brings it to life. But then Victor's shocked and disgusted by what he has done, and his creation, this humanoid, wants to know why he has been brought to life. So, in my opinion, and in many others, this novel serves as a basic template for many of its successors, as the key points in this novel are very generic to many of the mad scientist tropes today. One basic inspo for the mad scientist trope that I will start out with is Mary Shelley giving Frankenstein a Germanic origin. While the reasons for her choice might be the long-standing Gothic novel fascination with Germany, a lot of her successors have definitely taken her example and have run with it. As many of us know, the amount of mad scientist characters who either have ethnic German names or a very heavy accent, I can think of maybe like 10 examples at the top of my head. Alongside this very influential classic, the Germanic origin can also be a response to fears stemming from the Nazis' human experimentation and torture conducted under the disguise of science, or maybe like a result of a lot of Eastern European scientists migrating to the US from the world wars during the 20th century, or super popular scientists like Einstein being from Germany, and his looks, like with the strange hair and everything, could have influenced this trope. These are just conjectures that seem too obvious and possible, but I'm sure like there are articles out there on the subject that gives more substance to the stereotype. Another key point from Mary Shelley's novel is that while science itself isn't inherently frightening, characters like Frankenstein show how pushing the scientific boundaries to extreme limits can lead to terrifying outcomes. This is particularly significant when considering how some individuals perceive science as conflicting with morality or ethics. Many contemporary mad scientists cross ethical and logical boundaries in their pursuit of a perceived greater good. The mad scientist trope allows us to delve into the potential moral dilemma of new discoveries. We actually like often anticipate these issues way before they arise, like the example of Black Mirror or Westworld. But yeah, I like when I first watched Westworld, I thought it was so ahead of its time. Yeah, this could potentially happen. Yeah, robots and AI could take over the world. And right now, I'm seeing like a greater population of people who are, including myself, terrified of, the potential outcomes or possibility of losing your livelihood, your jobs. So, a lot of the time, rather than being a fully fleshed, complex character, they are a vessel for a moral dilemma or more like a literary tool for conflict. The mad scientist character is crafted to personify the cautionary tale of scientific horror. The underlying message of every mad scientist story, dating back to Frankenstein, is that humanity should avoid overstepping its limits. The very branch of natural science harbors potential threats. People have consistently expressed concerns about individuals acquiring too much knowledge or pushing the boundaries of understanding in ways considered inappropriate or blasphemous. For example, Galileo spent the last decade of his life under house arrest for advocating the heliocentric theory, which proposed that the Earth revolves around the sun. Similarly, the German alchemist Faust stirred controversy and inspired tales of making a pact with the devil for the sake of knowledge. A common theme in mad scientist narratives is the notion of playing God. There is a discrepancy between the immense power of nature and the limited capacity of the human mind. This creates a problem. We fail to understand the consequences of our actions because we cannot fully grasp the bigger picture. In more extreme stories, ignorance is seen as a virtue, while knowledge, like the very trait that elevated humanity, can be viewed as a sin. So these all show like an anxiety about science. And this is very understandable because as science develops into its own distinct field, it became difficult for the average person to understand. This led to the rise of the mad scientist trope, representing the growing disconnect between the complex scientific knowledge and the general public. Because when you think about it, for the average person, a complex scientific theory or something as simple as like how a plane flies isn't any more explicable or sensible than any miracle told in a holy book. So there's a very natural anxiety surrounding this progress that reflects onto the mad scientist trope. Following the devastating events of World War II, such as the Nazi experiments and the atomic bomb, the works of Oppenheimer, and with the start of the Cold War, the portrayal of mad scientists shifted to reflect the era's anxieties and worries. Very commonly showing the scientists as developing projects that are capable of wiping out humanity, like the more so as we get to see the real life mad scientists. So there is an anxiety about the scientist as well as the science because I read this somewhere. In the mid-19th century, there was a clinical association between genius and insanity. And this emerged at the time. And instead of celebrating like these talents and these geniuses, Victorians regarded the average person as the evolutionary ideal. So any deviation from the norm, including exceptional intelligence, was viewed as pathological. So there is a general caution for the applier of the science as well. While Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is a great reflection and portrayal of this anxiety and is a great inspiration for future adaptations, there can be downsides to it as well with the media portrayal. Because media undeniably influences the society and shapes people's perceptions of the world. And the surge of conspiracy theories during the COVID-19 pandemic fueled a new wave of scientific skepticism. This skepticism is reflected in a recent, I have to check this one, Pew Research Center survey, which reveals a decrease in the number of Americans who believe science has had a mostly positive impact in society, along with a continued decline in public trust in scientists. And this sentiment spans across the political spectrum, and it's not confined to any specific demographic. Approximately like 27% of Americans now report having little or no confidence in scientists to act in the public's best interests, and these similar trends are observed in UK and across Europe. The portrayal of scientists as eccentric, self-obsessed, and potentially malevolent contributes to this cultural polarization. When we continually see people of a particular group characterized as evil or villainous or emotionless, we inadvertently link those same negative traits to real people of that group. The characters that represent these tropes in media are not characters that we can usually empathize with or admire. Like the anti-science and the anti-scientist trope usually undermines trust in both scientific knowledge and its messengers. So while it might be fun to enjoy a one-dimensional stereotypical genius like once a while, because I do too, they can be really endearing, or they can, like, their presence can really enhance the plot. In order to restore trust in science, I think it's also crucial to address these misrepresentations and foster like a more accurate understanding of scientists and their work as well. So this was Who Ordered a Small Yappuccino, episode 4. If you like this episode, you can give a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. You can also follow the podcasts on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. You can also follow me on Instagram. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.